Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Brandforsk this summer morning and our result webinar, Lessons Learned from Bushfires in Australia. And with us today, we have Margaret McNamee and Lucas Hovart from Lund University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome, both of you. First of all, who are you, Margaret?
Hi, I'm Margaret McNamee. I'm Professor of Fire Safety Engineering here at Lund University, and my work often specializes in trying to understand the impact of fires on sustainability and also the role of the fire service in helping us deal with the complex challenges we face in fire.
Yeah. And you've been with us before in our webinars.
Many times.
So welcome back. Yes, many times. Yeah. And Lucas, this is your first time at our webinars. Welcome. Who are you?
Yes, it's the first time indeed. So I am Lucas Hovart. I'm a PhD student working at Lund University with Margaret since not so long ago, only 2 years. So that's probably explains why it's the first time I'm participating to this kind of things. Very happy to do so. And I specialize, or I try to learn to specialize on community preparedness, community engagement when it comes to bushfire and wildfire safety.
Yeah. Really interesting and important topic. And you've done this trip to Australia to learn, and it's part of a larger project as well, called "Not My Responsibility." A bit worrying title, I think. Tell us what is that big program? What is it about?
Yeah, it's an interesting title, but maybe it makes a little bit of sense if we explain. So we are trying to look at how to improve community preparedness in the Swedish context. And we are looking at how having common understandings between different stakeholders in communities can help improve that preparedness. And so we take, for instance, common understandings of what is a wildfire, what is vulnerability, but also common understanding of what are each other's responsibility. Something that actually we can see when we look at preparedness in general, something I could see firsthand in Australia as well. So hence the idea of not my responsibility. If everybody knows each other's responsibility, maybe we can find a path forward, or at least that's the hopeful assumption we have in that project.
Yeah. I hope so too. I'm also hopeful. Yeah, important questions really, and it's really quite of a journey you did. You got into the heat as well, and we're going to see more about that in a couple of minutes here. So, and the audience will be able to ask questions to you after your presentation that we will see in a couple of minutes. And so just lean back and enjoy the presentation. We will see more of you, Margaret and Lucas, in a while.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before we move on to the presentation, I'm just going to give you some brief information about Brandforsk. We have a vision, a fire-safe and sustainable society built on knowledge. We are working with developing and communicating knowledge to limit the negative consequences of fires in the society. We've been around since 1979, and we are a foundation since 2019. And everything we do is funded by our supporting organizations. So thank you, all of you that chip in and contribute to make this possible. And this makes us a collaboration of many parts in the society, both private sector and public sector. Fundraising so far this year is about 670,000 euro, and we are aiming for more, of course. And the money spent to fund projects like this one we will hear about now, for example, and to communicate research in webinars, podcasts, and websites, and so forth. We also have a research school for practicing fire safety engineers. They do a part-time PhD student period for 4 years. And we have scholarships for students. Now, these are our supporting organizations so far this year, over 70 now, and still room for more. So please become supporting organizations if you are not already one. Now the program for the day. After this short introduction, we will get a presentation of the project. And after that, we will have time for questions. And you can ask your questions in the Q&A or frågor och svar if you have the Swedish version of Zoom. So, and now to the presentation on the project.
Hi, my name is Margaret McNamee, and I'm a professor of fire safety engineering at Lund University. And together with Lucas Hovart, we're going to be presenting about lessons learned from bushfires in Australia. The presentation is based on a project funded by Brandforsk to learn about wildfire preparedness in Australia. But before I let Lucas present that project and himself, I'd like to start by saying a few words about a broader Formas-funded project in which he's doing his PhD, and which is the rationale behind the Brandforsk project. The question of climate change is once again more heavily debated in certain parts of the world. I think it's important to remind ourselves of the fact that there is clear evidence of global warming in our time. The picture that you see here represents the climate stripes that were developed by Professor Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading. These graphics are a visual representation of the change of temperature measured globally, where each year is compared to the average for the whole of the period, 1850 to 2022. We can see quite viscerally here the fact that as shades below the average are blue and shades above the average are red, that we have a clear increase in the overall global temperature. So we know from looking at this figure that globally the planet is warming. But what we don't know is, does this mean, or not from this figure at least, does this mean that we're going to have an average warming over the whole of the globe, or is it going to be different in different parts of the globe? Now, work that, amongst other things, has been done by the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has shown that the impact of climate change is going to be different in different parts of the world and is quite complex. But key messages from their most recent assessment report are that human influence on the climate is clear. Human-induced climate change is already here. It's not something that we see only in the future. And the present scale of disruption of our climate is unprecedented and will continue. Global warming is likely to continue despite our best efforts to combat it, and will take time to reverse. And we can expect, as one of the consequences of climate change, that we'll have an increased weather volatility in the future. Now, in many ways, it is this weather volatility that is of greatest interest in terms of wildfire danger, both in Sweden and around the world. Because in Sweden, at least, we can expect both periods of colder and wetter weather to occur, with increased flooding as a result of that. But at the same time, we can also expect warmer, drier weather in Sweden with an increased wildfire risk. And it's the complexity and the difference between thinking about climate in a global sense and thinking about weather in a local sense that we need to keep in mind when we experience cold days and think that that means that we're not experiencing climate change. So if we zoom into wildfires in Sweden, then we do know that wildfires are something that occur on a regular basis in Sweden. The graph down to the left lower corner shows the number of wildfire incidents per year in Sweden. And in fact, we can see that the number of wildfire incidents is not huge. It's not seen a huge variation, although it does go up and down a little bit since 1998 that you see on this graph. However, if we turn to the other graph, which is on the top right-hand corner, then this shows the annual burnt area in Sweden. And then we can see that there is quite a large variation. And in particular, years 2014 and 2018 saw very large fires occurring in Sweden. And so we know that wildfires are already a problem and they could become more of a problem in the future. And this data is presented from an article that was written by myself together with some other people in 2023. So another project that we've been working on, SMHI, did an investigation of the difference between the number of weather warnings that had been issued between the two periods in the 2010s. So 2011 to 2015 is the first period, 2016 to 2020 is the second period. And then they've looked at both precipitation, snow, temperature, high flow, grass fires, and forest fire warnings. And in the case of all 6 of these different categories of warnings, only precipitation saw a reduction in the number of warnings. All of the other warnings increased when comparing these two different periods. And indeed, forest fires showed that there was a over 75% increase in the number of forest fire warnings that were issued by SMHI between the periods of 2011 to 2015 and then the second period for almost all of Sweden. So we see a very clear increase in the forest fire issue that we're facing potentially in Sweden. Now, one of the things that is particularly of interest about this is the fact that the wildfire issue has many different stakeholders that are involved. And while we do have some good scientific information about wildfire behavior from a number of other countries where there's a lot of experience of wildfires, we don't have a lot of good experimental information available about wildfire forest fuel performance in Sweden specifically. So we were able to get funded, and by we I mean Lund University together with RISE, were able to get funded a project called Not My Responsibility, Improved Wildfire Preparedness Through Stakeholder Dialogue. And the vision of the project is that we could create a wildfire safe tomorrow in Sweden specifically through a shared understanding of wildfire danger, community vulnerability, stakeholder responsibilities and preparedness, with the goal of improving community preparedness for wildfires in Sweden through stakeholder dialogue. And you can see from the diagram here that the green side of the project plan is basically a stakeholder engagement side of the plan, whereas the blue side of the plan is making sure that we understand wildfire fuel behavior. And this joins together in the middle when we're looking at hazard exposure, vulnerability assessment, and also stakeholder dialogue to make sure that we all have a common view of what the wildfire issue in Sweden contains or entails, and who's responsible for what part of that wildfire picture. Now, even though, as I showed previously, we do have wildfires in Sweden, there are years where it's been exceptional problems in Sweden. Typically, the number and size of wildfires in Sweden is much smaller than in many other countries in the world, or at least in some other countries of the world. And in particular, Australia and Western USA are countries that stand out in terms of the number and size of wildfires. And so based on an interest from Lucas, we applied for funding from Brandforsk to be able to maybe learn from some of the experiences from a country which has a lot more experience of wildfires in Australia. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Lucas to be able to tell you a little bit about how he has traveled to Australia in order to try and learn from Australian experiences and what he's learned as well.
So, hi, so we'll start by presenting myself. So my name is Lucas Hovart. So I am the PhD student working in Margaret's project, so not my responsibility. And I had the chance to go to Australia for the past 6 months in order to learn from their experience with bushfire safety and to come back with some of that knowledge. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. And so I will begin with an overview of the activities that I undertook over the 6 months. before diving a little bit deeper into the themes of community engagement and preparedness. Then I will conclude with a few reflections and a few questions that may help us consider how these approaches could be adapted to the Swedish context. So during this exchange, I was based in 3 main locations. So I spent the first 2 months, so December and January, in Creswick. So Creswick is a small town in the Victorian countryside that hosts University of Melbourne campus, which is more specialized in forestry. Then I moved to Sydney, where I spent the month of February at the University of New South Wales. And finally, I spent the last 3 months in RMIT University in Melbourne. So I will explain a little bit more, describing a little bit more in details what I did in the different locations. So we'll start by describing the activities I realized in Creswick. So as I said, I spent the first 2 months there, and I was in the company of researchers specialized in forest ecology and bushfire science. So I was hosted by Professor Alexander Filkov, who introduced me to the Lära wildfire research group. So this is a large research network which is dedicated mostly to bushfire-related science. What may be the most interesting experience to share about my stay in Creswick is that it was a total immersion in the Australian environment, and more specifically in the practice of bushfire safety applied in daily life. And in order to explain that, maybe I can show you a little bit where Creswick is located. So as you can see a little bit for context, the campus borders a large stretch of bushland. And during the fire season, this is highly exposed to fire risk. So it was not only about studying bushfire, but also potentially experience it. As I stayed there during December and January, which arguably can be considered the heart of summer there, in preparation, I was required to complete a formal bushfire safety plan. And I also had to follow an online training course, which covered key safety behaviors during periods of elevated fire danger, which we did encounter. And yeah, that exercise on its own, like doing the plan and doing the online training, it was brought for sure valuable knowledge. But it just so happened that I got the opportunity to put that in practice rather quickly, given that Creswick did experience a rather impressive bushfire shortly after my arrival. I think I was there for barely 3 weeks, and I had to, I went through that and applied directly the knowledge gained in the exercise. So to give a very quick overview, and I will go more in detail in what's in there a bit later, can explain a little bit what the fire plan is about. So the fire plan is focused on preparedness logistics. So it will encourage a reflection on numerous details relevant to protect property and planning safe evacuation, and actually rather emphasizing the importance of the evacuation and of leaving early rather than stay and defend. That's a point that is reinforced both in policy and practice, and I will also touch a little bit more upon that later. The online training was rather a complement to that, and it offered like practical advice on safe driving during fire conditions, giving advice on route planning, protective equipment, and also more precisely survival techniques in worst case scenarios. And yeah, both resources were also emphasizing the importance of staying informed constantly during this event, and bringing that as a core component of safety. And when it comes to stay constantly informed, one thing that I used, and that most people used broadly, at least in the state of Victoria, is an app called Vic Emergency. And so what this app does broadly is that it provides a real-time information on fire danger rating, on local hazards as they are happening in real time, gives live updates on the ongoing fires and on the course of suppression as well, like how many vehicles are involved and what is like the state of the fire at the time. And it also communicates evacuation calls through notifications. So it's a very interactive app that that most people use. And here I have a few examples on situations where I could use this app. So this example shows what happened during the Grampians fires, which also happened in December 2004. So one day in Creswick, in the middle of the day, the sky turns completely brown, the sun appears red through the smoke, and just with one quick look at the app, I got to identify what was the source, what was the scale, quite gigantic in this case, of the fire, and then a quick look at the news allowed me to understand what was happening. Then I have a second example here. That happens on my return journey from Sydney. So I see a plume of smoke from the train window. I just open the app and I learn quickly that we are passing through an active or through rather like on side of an active fire zone. So that's another example of how you can quickly get to know what is happening. And if you are actually if you calibrate your main location in these areas, then you automatically receive a notification that tell you what is happening. So that's quickly to give context on what happened in these first 2 months, which were really fundamental for me to understand the Australian context. So it was really an immersion in a bushfire-prone setting, and it offered so not only theoretical knowledge, but rather like an embodied understanding of what it is to living with a fire risk and within a fire risk community on day-to-day basis. So moving on, I can talk a little bit about Sydney. So I spent the month of February in Sydney at the University of New South Wales, where I was hosted by Dr. Jacques Fourier. So he's a researcher specialized in interagency collaboration during large-scale fire events. And his work draws on management and organizational theory, which are really helpful to analyze the complex social dynamics that you can encounter in emergency response. So we had large theoretical discussions, which significantly helped me in the design of the interview guides that I used later on during the last 3 months to conduct more community-based interviews. So this is what I done during my last stay, which was in Melbourne. So I spent the final 3 months at RMIT University, and I worked there with Dr. Erika Kulagowski and Dr. Rosie Morrison. So both of them are engaged in projects examining community response to bushfires across Victoria. And I had the opportunity to assist them on one of their case studies. So this provided deep insights into more like people's decision-making processes, and particularly in terms of whether to evacuate or to remain and defend their homes. And somehow, like this whole process of going from a more on-the-field experience, then a theoretical experience, and then an applied case study really gave a natural progression to the whole trip in Australia, and allowed me to develop the knowledge that I'm going to share a bit more in detail. But before that, like a quick word on side activities that were also realized. So when I just arrived in Australia, I had the possibility to meet informally, a little bit by chance, people from a town called Marysville. So Marysville is a village that tragically burned entirely during the Black Saturday fires in 2009, and then was entirely reconstructed. So talking with these people really offered like more of a contextual story of what happens when people really go through the whole cycle of the fire, like from preparing to going through it, and then also the very tough recovery journey. So another thing that I had the chance to do was to go to indigenous managed land and to assist a little bit with fieldwork conducted there. So this was more of an introduction to traditional forest management technique and cultural perspective. And that also offers a certain perspective on how forest management can have a certain impact depending on how it's conducted on the development of fires. So in addition to that, I also attended the Society for Risk Analysis conference that was organized in January in Melbourne. So there I could meet researchers from Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States, and really offered a possibility to exchange with people from different perspectives, and also to extend the network and potential future collaboration between Swedish researchers and people internationally. And that has been even further developed during an online workshop with people from the University of Canberra, where I could also present the research that is ongoing here in Sweden and develop some interest for future collaboration. And so finally, before coming back to Sweden, I concluded with a visit to the Grampians region, which is rather mountainous and forested region on the west side of the state of Victoria. And that region has been severely affected by recent fires. So exploring that landscape allowed me to observe firsthand how the space in these large areas is also organized in order to support bushfire resilience. So yeah, that I did all of that to summarize a little bit the different side activities that I conducted on the side of the main locations. So now that I gave an overview of the main activities of these past 6 months, I will talk a little bit more in detail about community engagement. I will start by giving a little bit of context about the development of community engagement before showing how it manifests in practice. But before I go into that, I would simply like to mention it is rather important that this knowledge has been gained by direct and indirect interaction with people who live the real experience of living in fire-prone areas. So their stories through which I got access to this knowledge. These stories are real and sometimes were hard to hear. I will, of course, not go in detail in these stories here, but I think it's important to also manifest that it's with a lot of respect that I share a bit of this knowledge with you today. So, also for context, most of the observations on these topics come from time spent in regional Victoria, and particularly through the case study that I realized there and the interviews that I also conducted in that region. So to keep in mind that the examples that I will share primarily reflect this local context and maybe shouldn't be generalized to the whole territory of Australia. So in terms of bushfire safety in Victoria, you have several institutions that are active. Here I quickly show a few names for representation, but the one I'm going to focus on is a Country Fire Authority, which so CFA in this case, which stands out as a key actor. So quickly for the history, so CFA is established formally in 1945. So it is actually a federation of local fire brigades, which have a significant presence in rural communities. So these brigades already existed prior to 1945, and it seems then that they become a proper institution. And what makes CFA particularly notable is the fact that it relies a lot on volunteers that live in these different local areas. So they are completely embedded in local life. And many CFA members possess local knowledge, and they are active contributor to the community, both for education by participating through events or distributing educational material to the community, and of course also for interventions. So they have this presence, and they are generally known directly by the people who live there. And their visible presence helps ensuring that fire risk remains a constant part of the public awareness and public discussions in these different areas. And something else much more recent that also contributes to that is the Victorian Local Government Act from 2020, which is a statewide policy that introduced an encouragement for municipal governments to take more of an active role in community engagement. To be noted that municipalities are given flexibility in how they interpret and apply this responsibility and this principle of community engagement. But in practice, what it means is that you have sort of a variation of applications. So some council may choose to simply monitor public messaging, but it can go to other type of activities, such as hosting regular community events designed to keep bushfire risk and bushfire preparedness as an open and ongoing topic of conversation between the people, so that it stays really part of the way of living of these communities. And maybe a more visual way to represent how bushfire safety is part of the community life is to show a little bit some visuals. So if you would go in local area of the countryside of Victoria, you would see a few things that really reflects the fact that bushfire safety is part of the organized community life. So here in these little pictures, you have, for instance, the first one on the left is from Creswick, where you can see that you have a CFA station and a siren tower behind that I had the luxury to hear more than once. And this is from Creswick, but in pretty much every location, even sometimes very small ones, you would find a little CFA stations. In other places, you could also come across an oval. So this is what you can see in the central picture, which is a large oval area that is designed as an open field, and basically it has the purpose of creating a staging area that is rather protected from direct exposition to the flames, and it allows firefighters to have their own temporary refuge or to install their base, and people who didn't manage or didn't want to evacuate to join a rather safe place as a last resort. Some towns also have emergency relief centers that are capable of accommodating evacuees. And they are clearly identified as part of the local infrastructure. So you would have buildings that have the capacity to convert into an emergency relief center. Would that be needed? And these are just a few examples that you have visible signs that there is a collective culture of bushfire safety in these different places and in everyday life. So now I'll turn to more of the central question of preparedness and what it practically means for the residents living in fire-prone areas. So some may be familiar maybe with the stay and defend or leave early strategy, which is something that has long been central to Australian bushfire safety messaging. However, and due to tragic consequences experienced by some who in the past attended to defend their properties, emergency services now strongly emphasize the leave early approach rather than the stay and defend. And what does leave early mean in this case? Well, ideally, it means evacuating the day before or early in the morning of what would be declared extreme risk day. So a day of extreme fire danger here would refer to conditions in which a fire is considered to be likely to exceed the capacity of suppression forces. In some cases, it can even go to catastrophic rating. And in these cases, there can be a clear messaging that lives may be lost if no action is taken. So here, you can see that the communication style and the messaging doesn't necessarily shy away from saying things that may sound a little bit harsh at first glance. So this is really something that exists. And in practice, not everybody chooses to leave early, but such warnings do help in the way that they elevate the alertness and prompt people to review their plan. And so these plans usually both involve logistical and mental preparation. So residents, for instance, are encouraged to choose their destination in advance, to coordinate with their household member, to clear the vegetation around their property, to prepare emergency supplies, or even ensure that they can access up-to-date information, just to name a few of the things that you are encouraged to think of. And the messaging in these this plan is also very clear. Like it would be stated explicitly that you don't have to expect to have power, to have water, to have food, or to keep mobile signal during a fire. These resources may effectively come short depending on the circumstances. And again, the expectation are set very explicitly in that regard. So this is what fire planning guides look like. So they often include checklists of this sort, and they basically help structure people thinking and preparing. So these documents, they offer rather practical guidance. And here you can see the example of one that would prompt people to think about their trigger. So when would they leave? Would they leave on the announcement of an extreme day? Would they rather leave if a catastrophic day is announced? What is the element that will really activate their decision to leave? You have also like different questions to make them reflect on vegetation maintenance. And other examples here on how do they prepare the surrounding of their property in order to make it more defensible, or what are the things that they have to check in order to get ready to go. And here one that I find rather interesting, which is the example of the emergency kit. So not only is it interesting because it shows all the things that can indeed come useful and help you anticipate a little bit the kind of needs you could encounter in an evacuation scenario. But it also shows that being prepared is indeed quite a lot of logistics, because it's a lot of little details to think about. And here we are just talking about the emergency bag. But this also translates in all the different elements that the plan encourages you to think about. Now that I talked a little bit about recommendations to leave early, I will touch upon the stay and defend approach. So when it comes to preparation, all the aforementioned recommendations for the leave early part still apply. But additionally, people mentioned some actions that can assist, in this case, with the defensibility of the place. So for instance, you can hear people having a sprinkler system, which is also something that some people who decide to leave have, and they will activate it preemptively. Some people also choose to build their house with specific material to enhance the chance to resist the fire. And for those who choose to stay and defend, protective clothing can definitely help them resist the harsh conditions that they may face. Then during the interviews, we also have some people mentioning tactical tips and tricks, which are things that do not necessarily appear in any kind of documentation. It's more like a practical knowledge that's shared between people. And one that I will exemplify here is having water buckets that are tactically spread across the property in order to have like quick access to water in case of a starting spot fire that could happen in random places. Some also choose to invest in independent water and electricity supply, given that there is quite a large understanding that these resources aren't promised to be available. But then on top of all that, some testimonies of people who stayed and defended in the past also mentioned the importance of mental preparation. So the overall experience of defending one's property is described as being very difficult, and actually is not openly advised anymore, as I mentioned already. The thing is, it can be successful and certainly helpful to stay and to protect the property, but it might just as well be unsuccessful, and this depending on conditions. Regardless of the level of preparation and defensibility of the house. If once the fire reaches a certain level of intensity, even a very well protected house may not be possible to be saved. And so what this means is that the effectiveness of the preparation, while being non-neglectable, is in a certain sense partial and not entirely reliable. So this experience has been stated to be very stressful and sometimes even described as traumatic. Some people even mentioning that it left some post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's not something that is to be taken lightly. All this leads up to more of an analytical point that I will start here. With the idea that preparedness is helpful, but preparedness alone does not offer a certain safety. And so I will develop that by approaching a little bit the limitations of preparedness and how it can be find complementarity in what we will call readiness in this case. So to develop that, we can go back on the talk on the leave early approach. So leaving early is one way that to be somewhat certain to preserve one's life. But it's not something that can be generalized to other approaches. So one thing that can be said about the overall process of preparing for fire is that there are very little things that can be guaranteed and offered certainty. And here I have like just a few examples for that. So for instance, leaving a house behind, even if it's a house that is very well protected and very well prepared to resist, doesn't guarantee that it is going to stand once the fire is over. If one decides to leave, but to leave once the fire has started, there is no guarantee that evacuation will still be possible. There may be road cuts if trees are falling or are suspected to be, but there is a possibility that tree falls. Therefore, the road is not considered safe anymore and could be blocked, or simply if the smoke creates conditions that aren't optimal for driving anymore. Same goes if one stays and defends, because like the conditions will entirely determine the very possibility of the operation. If one is there to defend from spot fires, this is an example of something that can be somewhat managed. But if you would have a house, even a very well protected house that is exposed directly to a very strong fire front, then even that very well protected house may eventually fall. So the level of preparation is not a direct factor of success in the defensibility of the house. And finally, there is no guarantee that brigades will extinguish a house on fire while their forces are expected elsewhere. And that is something that is widely known by community members. Even some local firefighters have to witness their own houses burning while moving to fight elsewhere. So what is meant by all this is that the variation in circumstances will affect the range of possibilities for action. It also means that predictability, while it is existent to some extent, is limited and shouldn't be taken for granted. This asks the question of how do we navigate this level of uncertainty? And what we have observed in our interactions with community members who went through bushfire is that this partial predictability is generally well understood and well accepted. It also appeared that people have developed a form of strategy to assess their level of agency in real time. And here again, like a few examples on how it developed. So most interviewees would describe how they constantly monitor available information through the apps, but also through official websites or through social media. So there is like really this movement of constantly being aware of what information is available. But another way for them to get access to information is to be very attentive to the weather signals that they can directly observe through like generally sensory clues. So there was a certain showing from the people of a certain ability to, in a way, apply fundamental knowledge about fire. They know quite well how fire works and what different meteorological conditions mean in terms of fire, and they do apply that in real time to inform their decision making. And finally, they maintained recurrent communication with other community members, such as friends, neighbors, and family. And they would exchange their perspective and decision-making process, sometimes adapting depending on what is said during these conversations. So what it seemed here is that there is a form of in real-time triangulation of information throughout different sources. And this process allows people to adapt to changing circumstances and to act within these forms of uncertainty. And so one way I can maybe provide an example of that is by describing this Creswick fire that I went through myself. And here I will enter a little bit more of a narrative style to try to explain how the events occurred. So it starts the day before. or I received an announcement that the next day is going to be an extreme fire day. So initially the plan on paper was for me to leave early, thanks to a colleague in Ballarat being the next big city right under Creswick. So you can count 20 minutes in car between both places. And so my colleagues offered me to go to his place, would that be necessary? But when it happens, quite a on the moment situation is that I didn't want to bother, and so I didn't want to necessarily move. And that is something you can also see in interviews, that there are always sort of informal reasons why people don't necessarily follow what I have put on their plans, and that happened in my case as well. Nonetheless, my bag and my equipment was ready just in case, and I did notice during the day that indeed we were in extreme situation. So the temperature reached 40 degrees, and on top of that, the wind rose pretty strongly during the whole day. So as a result, during the whole day, I was very alert and very ready for something to happen. My alertness decreased progressively as we went through the afternoon until I started to feel rather safe. Deceptively so, because at 5:30 in the afternoon, the siren started. And the moment the siren started, I immediately received a notification on the Vic emergency app showing me that indeed there was a fire happening in the bush at the south of Creswick. Problem with that is that it blocked the road between Ballarat and Creswick. And here on the pictures, you can see one from me in Creswick and one taken from the house of my colleague. So the fire really was between two locations. So there was no option for me to evacuate in this way, at least anymore. So I took my equipment and did the most logical thing I could think of, which was to go downtown to the supermarket, because the supermarket is a hub where people are constantly interacting, and it would allow me to get information from other people. So as I was there, people seemed to be aware, but not necessarily evacuating per se, until after 30 minutes, a second siren started. And there we could see the updates of the events on the Vic emergency app, showing that the fire was growing extensively. It was evolving towards the other side, so not towards Creswick, and the wind was pushing the fire away from us. Still, we were receiving information to stay aware and alert for any potential change. So at that point, dozens of trucks passed through Creswick, giving a sense that something very important is happening indeed. Parents came and fetched their kids, and people started to come and talk to me about what was happening. And so a lady suggested that I should go to the tavern, the local tavern, to be close to people who would be able to guide me in case the situation would change and evacuation would be necessary. So I followed her advice, went to the tavern and explained my situation. And as I was there, a group of elderlies of the village gathered there and started to talk about the fire between themselves with the bartender. And there we could observe quite an interesting situation, because they were talking in between them, were looking at the websites, looking at the Vic emergency app. Then I went outside to look at the general situation, and on the porch of the tavern, other people were there, not necessarily looking at the app, but looking at the sky, talking about the weather, checking what the weather was going to be, to assess a little bit the evolution of the meteorological condition. And in a way, it is interesting that retrospectively thinking about this situation, the three elements that I mentioned before, being constantly aware of the information on the different information source, looking at the meteorological condition, and staying in constant communication with the people, were present in that one same place. And so eventually, around 7 p.m., temperature dropped drastically, or at least as drastic as it can be in Australia in the middle of summer. So below 30, started to rain, and I decided to go back to the campus. Then another interesting situation happened. So you had a group of people who were there for a research event on the campus, and they were fragmented in small groups, all with different idea of what they would do. So I talked a little bit with all of them and suggested to gather them to have like more of a common a common approach, something that was very much appreciated, and then got the comment that it's a little bit difficult for people who don't know others before a situation happened to start interacting with people in this type of situation. So it is also interesting to see that indeed having people who are having events or having a structure that allows people to socialize preemptively really helps, because if people have to know to interact with each other while they don't know each other when it's urgent, it can be potentially problematic. And then one last thing that I will say about this whole event is that despite the fact that I received a training just a few weeks before, that I went through a whole fire plan, that I was rather well prepared logistically, one thing I was definitely not prepared for was the adrenaline, the fact that I had to adapt to a blocked route that I didn't expect. The fact that I had to communicate immediately with people that I didn't know, and that I had to think fast. So when people in the interviews mentioned that the mental preparation is definitely something that has to be taken into account, through my personal experience, I can definitely support that take. So to summarize that, to summarize what I learned from this experience, I will share a little bit of an interpretation here in the form of a little model. So it seems that preparedness finds support in what we may call here a readiness. So if we look at the several elements that we have observed, both in people's shared experience and in my own, readiness can be associated with a few conditions that I have mentioned a little bit already. So access to quality information, ability to stay alert by seeing and interpreting in real time the different changes that occur, and connection with others, both to ask for direct support and in order to exchange perspective and to discuss possibilities. So with a retroactive mind on my own experience of the fire, what I can say is that I was very well informed, I was alert, but what I lacked, however, due to circumstances, was the connections. And then when I think of most of my efforts and most of my actions in real time during the whole situation, they were all centered around compensating for this lack, whether it was going downtown to meet people or gathering fragmented groups on campus. So it seems like behind these intuitions that there are different conditions that allow you to take action and take a sort of responsibility for what is happening. There are a few questions that are worth investigating further in the future. So now I will end this presentation by saying just a few words about recovery. So this dimension hasn't been explored with the same level of depth as preparedness yet, at least, but there are already a few elements that are maybe worth sharing today. So the main lesson we have gained from this experience in Australia is that recovery does not start after, but already during the fire. So this insight comes from the observation that once evacuated, people already express important needs, and mostly would be a need for information and information regarding their own property, what is happening currently to that property. A need for emotional support, general need for a sense of agency, a power to be able to do something. And similarly to what we expressed before, there is no guarantee that these needs can be met. So the same level of partial uncertainty is present here. And it still is present after the fire. So after the fire, help exists and is available for people who need assistance in the recovery process. However, this help has conditions and doesn't offer a certain immediate answer. And a way to phrase it could be that help is available to solve the problem, but it's really not the same thing as an already solved problem. It is just the start of a process, and the description of this process from several people show that it can be very long and can be very tedious. And this process can also lead to unforeseen development. And here are just like a few examples that we encountered. Like insurance, for instance, doesn't insure immediately nor predictably. You cannot know in advance exactly, depending on how the situation is going to be assessed, how much you're going to be insured for. Another example is that clauses regarding the costs or the possibility of cleanup for a burned property can completely vary, and you might as well be helped to clean your burned property or not receive that help. Some people may also have to live in temporary accommodation, and sometimes for a long while, so they have to trade their comfort and their lifestyle. And additionally, grief can be very strong. For some people, feelings may be very hard to process, and the accumulated lot of all these challenges, including the emotional and relationship challenges, can sometimes lead to tragic consequences for family, sometimes more than the fire itself did. So what was interesting with that is that people manifested a sense of generally good preparedness for before and during the fire, but they also voiced a sense that something is lacking in preparing the communities for what happens after. And that is sort of a signal that maybe there is a sort of gap here, and maybe not only a gap that is interesting to address in Australia, but something that can be taken as an anticipation if we want to learn from what is happening in Australia, for instance, in our context. So with that here, I will summarize a little bit this learning from Australia and talk briefly about what we can get from it for Sweden. And so to summarize what we learned from Australia, we can go a little bit about like the identification of key components. One is that communities learn to live with fire. Like fire really is part of the day-to-day life of the different communities who are exposed to that hazard. Another thing is that access to information is possible, but it is also understood, and people have the culture of knowing where to get the different information. Another aspect being that expectations are very much clarified, even if they are blunt and even if they are said in a very explicit way, they are put black on white. Another aspect is that communities are educated on bushfire and can read the different signals. They understand, in a way, the basic science of bushfire. Communities are also connected, and because they are connected, they have the possibility to exchange their perspective on preparation. And finally, the last point that I mentioned, that recovery is as challenging as preparedness. And so now we can think a little bit about how do we gain from that knowledge in Sweden? And what I thought is that maybe we could avoid the pitfall of just thinking of what can be taken and reapplied here, and more use this knowledge in order to inform the questions that we could ask ourselves in order to understand what the context is in Sweden is. And so here I have like a few examples of questions that we could ask. For instance, how do Swedish communities perceive and express their need for preparation? It could be very interesting to know if, depending on how they perceive fire risk and fire hazard in Sweden, if they feel needs that are similar to the Australian communities or completely different. Another very important question is what is already present. Instead of reinventing the wheel for community engagement, could be very interesting to see what we can build upon instead of reinvent. And then another set of questions could be, how are the expectations generally communicated in Sweden? Is it a rather explicit style? Is it a rather implicit style? And what communication style and strategy is likely to generate the best caption? So it is one thing to understand that communication is important, but maybe it doesn't have to be approached the same way, depending on context. So in that stage, what is maybe a good takeaway from this experience in Australia is that we will have a better information on how to investigate the current Swedish context. And so these are like the next step that we will overtake. So the project, Not My Responsibility, Improved Preparedness Through Stakeholder Dialogue, is going to continue until 2027 or 2028. And at the moment, we are still ongoing with evaluation of the fuel behavior here in Sweden. And then the next step is going to be planning for workshops with stakeholders. And the aim is to analyze the data and begin the workshop starting at the end of 2025. So, of course, if there are any questions regarding that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you very much both for the opportunity for this trip and for your attention today.
Thank you, Margaret and Lucas. Very interesting presentation, I think. I'm going to pick up some questions from the audience. All those maps that you showed in this app, this Vic app, Vic Emergency, who's responsible of producing those maps and keeping them updated? And
yeah, so you have two things there. So the core maps that are present on the app, they come from VicMap. So that's the Victorian official mapping service, and that service is provided by the Department of I think Transport and Planning, probably. So that's one thing. But then you have the other thing, which is all the incident inputs that you will find in real time on the maps. And that comes from the different agencies that are in touch with these. And so like CFA, for instance, is one of them, but it's not the only one. So you have like for your Forest Fire Management Victoria, SES, which is State Emergency Service, and then you could also have like a meteorology office and this kind of thing. So all these different agencies will provide the input for the different incidents, which will in real time be updated on the map provided by the Department of Transport and Planning.
Yeah. And you can also see the dispatch of fire vehicles. Was that correct?
Yes, and that's quite impressive. It's updated in real time and quite fast, and so you can really see the evolution of the suppression efforts by seeing how many vehicles are present, but also they update you on the state of the effort. So if it's contained, they will say it. If it's not yet, they say not yet contained, they will say it as well. And then you will have different levels of that I maybe didn't show so well, but you will have different levels of zones on the map. So one informing you about like the core affected zone, the at-risk zone, and then also the zones that will receive notification for evacuation. So all of this goes through the app.
Right. So there's a lot of information that you provide to people, but do they appreciate it? Is there a risk that is too much information?
Yes, absolutely. And what you get from the people to begin with, it's maybe important to say that the app is one core element, but it's one core element among others. So people stay informed through different channels. Some will go to the website of CFA. Some will go on Facebook groups. And the thing is, different agencies are very well aware of that. So CFA has a presence on the Facebook groups as well. Also noting that, as I mentioned, members of the CFA locally are part of the communities. You also have sometimes small associations in the communities that like support associations for emergency that are more like informally constructed by some citizens, and they will take charge of informing people like that. So all of that to say that they do definitely appreciate, and they tend to be well aware of the different sources of information and well connected with them.
Yeah. Probably a good way to keep control of the information, and to really provide good information instead of people speculating on Facebook and trying to find news on the web and such. I think it's probably a very good idea to provide information like this.
Yeah.
Another question is about the sprinkler, the stay approach. Do they have sprinkler systems that are good enough, or what kind of level of fire do you think that they can actually protect the buildings with?
Well, that question is maybe it's a great question to exemplify the fact that your level of preparedness, the effectiveness of your preparedness is always going to be dependent on the conditions. And maybe I can think of, so one of the case study I was working on where I have two drastically opposed examples. So you had one family that possessed an orchard on their property, and the orchard had a sprinkler system. The whole property did not have a sprinkler system. Some people even have on their roof, for instance. They had, but only in the orchard. And so they activated that. The orchard was kept humid thanks to that. And the fire reached their property, and it so happened that it reached it from the side where the orchard was. So what the fire met was that wet part of the property, if you want, and that was enough for them to protect the property. One of the reasons being that it met the property from that side. Would it have been from the other side? Maybe it wouldn't have been guaranteed. But then we have a second example of a man in the same community, same fire, who, if you want, was a person who was very well aware, very well prepared, and takes that issue very seriously. So he had probably a very well very well organized setting. And so he talked about his sprinklers, and his sprinklers stopped working because the joints in the sprinklers melted because of the heat. But a big thing to consider is that person specifically, his property faced the head of the fire front that went through the property, and tragically, he lost his property. Everything burned. He survived. Was helped by the brigades, but in the meantime, although his property was very well prepared, the condition being that he faced not only the front, but like really the head of the fire front, made it that no matter how good the sprinklers were, they were not helpful in that case.
No, right. How do you provide all the water that is needed if you turn on a sprinkler system for hours?
Yeah. So some people, so we have also information on that. It happened that the water supplies are cut. That's a possibility if you are connected to the general supply. And some people anticipate that, which and the way they anticipate it is by having a private independent water supply. Of course, it can only supply so much, and also it's to be mentioned it is costly, so not everyone can necessarily afford it. But yeah, it is something they anticipate. It's fairly well known that general resources are not guaranteed to be kept in the condition of air. And you will find that even on small documents. I think the first time I was made aware of that was in a small flyer that I received when I arrived in my first days. I go through the flyer very quickly, and at the end, like in very bold character, they said, don't expect water, don't expect electricity, don't expect food, don't expect signal. It may just shut down. So it's very clear.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. We have questions about fatalities in bushfires in Australia, and I think Margaret, you have dug into this, I believe.
Actually, it's there was a publication a few years ago which looked into fatalities across a number of different countries that have experience of wildfires, and I happen to have a slide because I show it to students in a course.
Oh.
So I don't know if I can actually show the slide. Maybe I can.
Yes, I think you can.
This is an article that was published by an author, Haynes, together with a number of other people, looking at wildfires and WUI fatality fires. between 1900 and 2017. So it doesn't have the most recent fires. But as you can see, it varies a lot in Australia. Even though Australia has a lot of wildfires, often they're very good at making sure that people are not exposed to the wildfires in a way that means that you have fatalities. But there are a number of very large fires that are part of the reason why Australia is so well prepared, because of the experience from these large fires. And Lucas actually mentioned one of those in his presentation, the Black Saturday fire of 2009, which is the most fatal fire that there has been in Australia. But most years the number is quite low. As you can see, actually, in modern time, mostly it's firefighters, the blue part of the curve or of the bars, that are actually dying in fires. But the Black Saturday was different. Interestingly, there's actually one other figure that I might be able to show, which shows that the distribution between men and women that are dying in wildfires in Australia. And here you can see that there is a slight difference between firefighters and civilians, where it's mainly men that are the firefighters that are dying in fires in Australia, or have died in fires in Australia. But we do see that women are becoming more actively involved in wildfires, and as part of that, both as firefighters and as civilians, no doubt, staying and trying to protect property previously. And so they're also more prevalent in the data as well in recent times.
Yeah. Do you know whether these fatalities depends on their strategy on leave early or stay and defend?
I think there has been a change in the strategy in Australia. That was more common previously that in Australia there was a stay and defend strategy, whereas that is not recommended today. But I don't think they certainly don't in this article make the point that that's necessarily the reason for the change. It really is the fire itself and the conditions of the fire that can just overwhelm a population in a way that is difficult for them to get away.
Yeah, and maybe cut off a road, like in Lucas' example here. Yeah. I was thinking about when I listened to this. Does this happen? I mean, it's kind of special that leave early is actually before you even have a fire. Just the risk of a fire is so big that you leave. And what happened to the society? And does this happen a lot? What happened when people leaving their work, getting no salary? And I mean, it affects a lot of things. Is this a societal problem in Australia?
Yeah. So to begin with, people are receive this incentive of leaving early, which what it means exactly in the recommendation is to leave either the night before or the morning of the day that is considered to be an extreme or catastrophic day. Factually, little people do it. So you have a few people from the interviews we have who decide to leave early and enact that plan effectively, and often there are people who have less capacity as well, so elderly people, for instance. But most people, and including some elderlies, decide to stay and assess themselves. So they still have their plan is still to leave, but leave depending on what happens. And there is a big question actually from CFA on how to, their question is like how to make sure that people do leave early when they are recommended to do it. And the conclusion of the research that was done around that was that even if people decide not to leave early, there is still an interest in telling them to leave early because it does activate their alertness. And that activated alertness has very concrete consequence on how they will behave the day that is considered to be extreme or catastrophic fire conditions. So it has some use. But that's one part of the answer to your question. And the second one, does it have consequences on society? Well, You do have people, again, from the interviews that I have, who own a shop, for instance, and decides to close the shop. You have people who also decided what to do, because they received an email the night before from the school saying, okay, the school is going to close, and therefore they're like, oh, if the school is closing, then yes, we are going to move because we don't have to put the children at the school, for instance. So there is some level of impact on society, indeed. To which extent, I must admit, I don't know, but there is.
Yeah.
Maybe I can jump in as well. I mean, one thing to remember, although the wildfire season is quite long in Australia, it is during the period when schools are closed. It's the summer holidays over the Christmas period. So, there may be periods, even though, as you said, Lucas, there can be times when the school is closed and kids are in school daycare, like out of school activities, but nonetheless in the school environment, even during the summer for a large period of time, in the same way that you would see here in Sweden. So, I mean, there's definitely a potential disruption, but a thing that we see not just from Australia, but also from countries like the US or Canada, where there is a lot of experience of wildfires. Then one of the things that appears to be adhered to quite extensively is that people have a bug bag. They have an escape bag so that they're packed and ready to go if they need to. But otherwise, they're very, let's wait and see. So they actually, don't necessarily leave early as they're advised to. But the government agencies, if you will, they're also dealing with a liability question whereby saying to people, well, we told you to leave early. Then they're avoiding being responsible for someone who actually decides to stay.
Yeah. Do you think it affects people's risk behavior? Maybe not firing up the barbecue if they know this is one of those days.
I mean, one thing I can jump in as an Australian, and I haven't lived in Australia for many, many years, but I think that there's also a lot of social pressure in Australia that if it is a, hot weather with a fire ban, then, it's very poorly looked on to light up the barbie. And there's a lot of social pressure not to exhibit that risk behavior.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that, Lucas, when you were there, because you're been there more recently.
Mm-hmm. There were Barbies, but in very safe areas.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you think you talked about preparedness and the bug bag to leave? I mean, when we talk about preparedness in Sweden, we talk about cold, we talk about snow blizzards and being out of electricity, maybe being out of water. We rarely talk about leaving your home. Is that something that we maybe should add to the communication in Sweden?
If I jump in, I think, it's important in risk communication always to tailor that risk communication to the situation. So we don't need to have the same kind of risk communication that they have in Australia, but I think that we can learn a lot about the way that the local community is engaged in assessing their risk in a real-time basis. And the kind of communication that we have, like if the war were to come or something like that, that kind of communication is very well tailored to the Swedish cultural perspective, if you will.
Yeah. And also you mentioned it, and that is also brought up several times in Sweden, know your neighbors, the value of that, to have your network and really to be easy to connect to people and help each other. And it almost sounded a bit cozy to go down to the tavern when you talked about that.
Yeah, it was a little bit of relief.
Yeah. I can really see that. It's safety in gathering with other people. So, yeah. You also talked about a lot of volunteers involved in all this. I think it sounds like Australia is ahead of us using volunteers in in this. Did you meet any volunteers working with this?
I at least had access to some interviews with volunteers. So first, I may mention that yes, they have a base of volunteers. They still do encounter difficulties with recruitment. So human resources in this kind of association is still a thing, although they have a large base of volunteers. But what struck me in the data I had was that after experiencing a fire, some people mentioned that they would like to be more knowledgeable and to be better prepared, and they know already that through CFA's local involvement, they get access to a lot of information. And some say, I think I want to engage in CFA activities in one way or another, also to be better prepared and more knowledgeable. So there is that is what I see, at least that struck me the most, is the presence of this fire brigade, the fact that they are really a part of the community, that you see their little station, and even very, very small places that I could see when I was taking the train to Sydney. Villages that looked so small had a little CFA station. So there is the word I use is that there is a face for fire safety in all these different places.
All right. Yeah.
And maybe I can say, I think that, we would have a similar tension here in Sweden between, the fact that there's an identified challenge, and then the, in terms of wildfires or in terms of fires, but then the difficulty in having citizens feel like this is my problem. I want to be involved. And in Australia, it's maybe easier than in Sweden because of the fact that, as you were saying, Lucas, people are living with wildfires. They really do see this as something that impacts on them. Whereas in Sweden, I think you'll find that a lot of people just feel like this is something that really is not important to me. And so looking to the future of this becoming, something that's more prevalent in Sweden means that we may be having to wait to get this community engagement until it actually becomes more visible.
Right. Yeah. I've been a voluntary firefighter for forest fires for a couple of years now, and that's really fun. I can recommend that.
Good on you.
We are now into the forest fires season in Sweden. So do you want to send any recommendations to our listeners to what to think about?
I mean, one thing I think is just to be aware, to make sure, as Lucas was saying, to make sure that you keep yourself informed. Lucas was talking about the Vic emergency app, but there are similar apps in Sweden where you can obtain information about whether or not there are not only fire events, but other types of dangerous things that are happening. So there's an MSB app, I believe. There may be other apps as well.
Yeah, this brandrisk ute.
Yes. So I think have an app like that, and Lucas, your diagram with the information, awareness, connectivity, I think is really a good summary of things that people should know. Being aware, being alert, making sure you have the connections to neighbors or to those around you are all important things.
Yeah, and then I can jump in on that. And so Margaret, you mentioned, being connected with people, looking at these Swedish apps. So that would be source of information and people. And then the third one would be, being aware of the conditions. So I will give a little advice on that. If it has been dry for a little while, even like maybe just a week or so, if the temperature is above 30 and there is a lot of wind, then that's enough condition to be alert.
Yeah. And I liked your example from Australia that people kept water in strategic places, maybe in the garden or in their field or something, to if something happens, just have it nearby. And I live on the countryside, and when we are collecting the hay in a couple of weeks, it is really dry, and sometimes we get sparks from the from the machines, and it's a good advice to keep some water down on the field as well.
And now that I have a bit more time, maybe to say, because that tip is really, in a way, it's almost funny. So these people, they have these buckets, so quite a few buckets ready, just in case, and they also have a few mops, and they specify cotton mop, not a synthetic mop, because the cotton will absorb the water, and so they put these buckets a bit everywhere, and they say one of the fastest and most efficient way to get rid of the spot fires from the embers without using too much water is to put the mop in the water and then put it immediately on the spot, and so you don't use too much water and it's very fast.
Yeah, very good old way. We call it viska in Sweden. Brandviska is a very old tool for firefighting. It's it has proven itself for many times. Yeah.
It seems like it proved itself on the other side of the world as well. So
yeah. Great to have you here, and you will go on with your work for a couple of years. I hope to hear from you again, learning more about everything that you collect and analyze and learn from different parts of the world, and how to maybe not be stuck in the place, not my responsibility, but to actually move forward from that.
Indeed. Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you very much, and have a nice summer to fires.
Yes.
You too.
So before we wrap it up here, I'm just gonna give you some information about what is coming up here at Brandforsk. This was our last webinar for this season, so we will have some summer holiday and we will get back after the summer. And I will, of course, take every opportunity to say thank you to all our supporting organizations, and also to encourage everyone to become a supporting organization. It's not expensive, it's not difficult in any way. Just look at the webpage for it or give me a call. To keep track on what is happening here, you can follow us in social media and sign up for our newsletter. That's a very good way to keep up with us and what is going on, and new webinars coming up, and new research projects, and so forth. And of course, follow the webpage as well. We will always keep that up to date. And I would like to talk to you about our podcast. It's in Swedish, so you can learn not only about fires and fire safety, you can also learn Swedish. And before we end, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Francis Eurinus and Mattias Amri, who has been part of producing this webinar. Thank you very much. And that's it for now. I wish you all a nice summer, and please answer our questionnaire after the webinar. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact information on the webpage, and maybe you have some suggestions about webinars or research projects, or just questions in general. So just keep in touch. Have a nice summer. Bye bye.